Dear viewers, welcome back, survivors of the unknown. Let's step into another tale of courage and mystery, where every choice could be the last. Chapter 830, When I Don't Owe Them Anything. Zhang Yi waved his hand, signaling Lao Tian to prepare a lifeboat for them. Lao Tian came over and whispered in Zhang Yi's ear, "We only prepared 2 lifeboats. If we give them one..." Zhang Yi glanced at him and said, "Just give them a raft as a token of appreciation. Are you really going to give them a lifeboat?" Lao Tian understood and immediately smiled and led people to find a rubber boat. Although Zhu Yonk and others had some complaints about Zhang Yi's actions, after experiencing the experience of being thrown into the sea by Shani Zhengnan, they were not so difficult to accept the fate of the other 2 Japanese people. You see, at least Zhang Yi gave them a boat and didn't throw them directly into the sea.
People are like this.
If you want to open a window in the wall, people will stop you, for various reasons. But if you say you want to tear down the wall, people will come and tell you in a compromise that it is better to open a window. After Lao Tian brought the rubber boat over, the 2 Japanese people cried for a while. But Zhang Yi's eyes were very indifferent, and he didn't care about the life and death of these 2 people at all. Oh no. In principle, he didn't care much about the life and death of most people on this ship. Out of humanitarianism, Zhang Yi prepared 3 days of dry food for them when he drove them off. In this way, everyone looked at Zhang Yi and suddenly felt that this person was still very humane. After dealing with these 3 people, Zhang Yi waved his hand and said, "Let's go." The people on the ship returned to the cabin with their own thoughts. Most people had no sympathy for the plight of the Japanese people and even talked and laughed about it. These little Japanese hid really well. I didn't even find them on weekdays. Hey, they deserve to die. I think Mr. Zhang did the right thing. Why did they get on our Huashu country ships? Speaking of that group of bastards, they dared to run to the land of Huashu country to do evil, which made me angry. If I were there at the time, I would definitely rush up and fight them. Probably only some foreigners in the Yenlu group had some concerns about this matter. Before leaving, Che Haiqing ran over and expressed his loyalty to Zhang Yi. "Mr. Zhang, I will report to you if there is any disturbance below. Please rest assured, I am here and will never allow anything that displeases you to happen." Che Haiqing is a good dog. Maybe this dog is not loyal enough, but there is absolutely no problem in letting him bite his companions to save himself. Zhang Yi stared at him with a smile and patted his face lightly. "Very good, you help me keep an eye on them. But remember, don't bite people randomly. I don't like the mess on the boat. Otherwise, I will deal with you first." Che Haiqing swallowed his saliva and nodded like pounding garlic. Mr. Zhang loyalties. After they all left, Zhang Yi found Zhu Yonk standing by the railing, looking at the rubber boat in the distance with a face of compassion. Are there miracles in this world? Maybe there are. But almost no one who sees that thin little boat drifting on the vast ice sea will think that they can survive. Zhang Yi doesn't intend to pay attention to her emotions, so let her experience the cruelty of the world more. But Zhu Yonk said to Zhang Yi, when you want to deprive them of their right to survive, you actually feel very happy inside, right? Zhang Yi looked back at her curiously and raised his eyebrows. Zhu Yonk bit her red lips and looked at him straight in the eyes. "Let me ask you, if Yamada Masano was not a bad guy, but an ordinary Japanese, would you still throw him into the seas?" Zhang Yi said without any hesitation, "Of course. In fact, it doesn't make much difference to me. I don't owe them anything. They can be good or bad, and they have no favors to me. So as long as I am happy, I can drive them off my boat," he said with a smile, "and remember, it was me who let them live a few more days. They should thank me." Zhu Yonk frowned. If they hadn't boarded the boat, maybe they would still be alive and well now. Zhang Yi laughed with his neck tilted back. Miss Zhu, a teasing and cold look flashed across his eyes. "You are so naive." From the moment he boarded the Yenlu Island, all the people related to Li Zhongyu, if they don't leave with him, will have only one way to go, and that is death. The secret of the source of God must not be leaked at all. Zhu Yonk realized something and looked at Zhang Yi in astonishment and horror. Zhang Yi ignored her and went back to the cabin with Shou Kur. Compared to the still immature Zhu Yonk, Zhou Kuder stood beside Zhang Yi with a silent smile. Zhou Kuder had long been accustomed to everything that happened here. On the Yenlu group side, Che Haiqing went down the cabin triumphantly, even humming a little tune leisurely. He stole the show today. With his help, Zhang Yi found the two Japanese hiding in the crowd. In any case, he would be Zhang Yi's eyes and ears from now on. In this way, he would have a special status in the middle cabin where the rock flow group was.
As
Soon as he came down, he was suddenly held down by several people. Che Haiqing, why did you expose Nodo Naoko and Sagawa Akito? A member of the rock flow group grabbed his collar angrily, his eyes almost spitting fire. What did they do wrong? You want to deprive them of the chance to live. Che Haiqing looked indifferent. Hey, I'm a Silla. Isn't it natural for Silla people to hate Japanese people? And you should be grateful that I saved you. Everyone knows that Mr. Zhang hates Japanese people. If we don't report it, can you guarantee that you won't be implicated? Can you? Che Haiqing shouted to the members of the rock flow group. This question made everyone hesitate. No one dared to guarantee what would happen to Zhang Yi. If they were really implicated, they would not be willing. Che Haiqing disdainfully broke away from the man's hand and adjusted his collar. What you need to consider now is how to survive. He looked at the huge and terrifying ice sea outside the window and said in a deep voice, before this ship completely docks, no one can guarantee that they will survive. So we must do whatever it takes. Li Zhongyu watched silently from the side. He did not take action against Che Haiqing. After listening to Che Haiqing's words, he returned to his room thoughtfully. At this time, Zhang Weiwei, entrepreneur Ma Wenjing, and several moderate members of the Yenlu group were all in their room. Chapter 832. Panic. As soon as Li Zhongyu entered the room, he said with mixed feelings, Mr. Zhang was too ruthless. I don't know whether it was the right thing to ask for help from Jiangnan district. He sat on the edge of the bed with a mixed expression. Zhang Weiwei came over, hugged his back and comforted him. This is not your fault. If we continue to stay on that island, we will not survive for more than a month. At this time, Ma Wenjing crossed his arms and said calmly, although that person's style of doing things is a bit tough, I don't think he is a bad person. Everyone in the room heard the spiritual leader speak and couldn't help but look up at him. Ma Wenjing shrugged his shoulders and analyzed to everyone with a serious expression. Now is a critical moment. After this period of understanding, I also know some things about the outside world. In fact, the outside world is more cruel than the Yenlu Island. People need to pay a higher price to survive. In this environment, people who can survive cannot be merciful. As the saying goes, in troubled times, severe punishments should be used. There is nothing wrong with his strict management. At least in terms of food supply and other living conditions, he is still good to us. With Ma Wenjing's analysis, everyone nodded and relaxed a lot. Zhang Weiwei held a different opinion. She frowned and said, but I always think that it is a bit too much to escalate personal grievances to the behavior of the entire group. Yamada Zhengnan made a big mistake, and it is not wrong to be punished. But the other two people are indeed innocent. Ma Wenjing shook his head helplessly. In an avalanche, no snowflake is innocent. Everything is a cycle of cause and effect, and retribution is inevitable. Although I can't do it, I can understand it. Ma Wenjing's meaning is very clear. Those two people are pitiful, but are the billions of people who died in the apocalypse not pitiful?
are
The tens of thousands of Huaxi people who finally survived the apocalypse and were killed by the eclipse moon not pitiful? In a chaotic world, compassion for the world needs to be paved with strength. The room where Bai Mo and others are. This room is basically occupied by foreigners, including several overseas Chinese. Bai Mo was frightened by Zhang Yi and fainted, and was carried back by others. After he woke up, he kept muttering, "Oh, my God." He was very scared, fearing that he would be thrown into the sea and turned into an ice lump like Yamada Masami. "It's terrible. All this is terrible," Bai Mo said painfully, covering his head. Eisenman, who was sleeping opposite him, hurriedly made a gesture to silence him, then signaled to others with his eyes, and then signaled to the outside of the door. Mo suddenly woke up. After Che Haichung betrayed the two Japanese people of the Rockflow group, the people on the boat, especially the foreigners, felt fear. If he showed his dissatisfaction with Zhang Yi and other crew members, he would probably be reported to the higher authorities. He quickly covered his mouth, and after a long while, he deliberately said loudly, "Mr. Zhang is absolutely right. In fact, I also hate the Japanese very much. They should have died long ago." Aizaman also echoed, "I firmly support all decisions made by the captain." As soon as these two people spoke, the other people in the room also woke up and began to express their loyalty louder than the other. Because Che Haichung might be eavesdropping outside. Even other people in the room might report them. At this time, Che Haichung pushed the door open and walked in. Seeing the scene in front of him, his face was full of sarcasm. Oh, when did everyone's ideological awareness become so high? It's a pity. He closed the door with his backhand. They are not here. They can't hear what you say. He had a half smile on his face, and his eyes swept over everyone coldly. Everyone, from now on, I am Mr. Zhang's spokesperson. I hope you will not make inappropriate remarks, especially don't talk about him and other adults on the ship casually. A cold current instantly passed through everyone's body, making their backs cold and shrinking subconsciously. After Yamada Masano and the other 3 Japanese people were thrown into the sea, the next day, Che Haichung hurried over to find him. If the people in the lower cabin want to come up, they must get the consent of the guarding crew. However, Che Haichung had made a meritorious report before, so the guarding crew agreed to help him pass it on to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi opened the door and asked the crew what was going on. The crew said, "It's that Scylla guy who wants to see you. Judging from his appearance, he probably wants to tell you a little tale to win credit." A sarcastic look appeared at the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth. This kind of dog thing is very good at biting its own people. And that's not all. Since last night, several people have come secretly to us to report the people around them. Captain, they seem to have a lot of opinions about you in private. They often say bad things about you behind your back. Do you think you should deal with it? The crew member made a downward gesture. Zhang Yi glanced at him, his eyes full of indifference.
When I
was working before, my colleagues scolded the leader every day and shouted that they wanted to resign. But 5 or 6 years have passed and the same group of people are still on the job. When they meet the leader, they are as happy as if they were his own sons. People's mouths are always the worst behind your back. Even the best friends will say bad things about you. Not to mention them. Zhang Yi crossed his arms and said lightly, "I hate this kind of atmosphere. Tell them not to come and disturb me if it's not a big deal." The crew member lowered his head and thought about it thoughtfully. Then, what is a big deal? Well, Zhang Yi thought about it, but couldn't help laughing. In fact, for him, nothing can be considered a big deal. Under the premise of having absolute strength, all the behaviors of ordinary people are nothing more than jokes in his eyes. Judge for yourself. Zhang Yi waved his hand after he finished speaking. The crew scratched his head and left the door of Zhang Yi's room with a confused look. Che Haichung, who failed to report, was a little depressed. He originally thought that he could rely on this to gain Zhang Yi's trust and step-by-step climb to the power level on the ship, or at least become a privileged person. He was very skilled in this trick in the high level of Scylla. Unfortunately, this time, the supreme ruler on the Gene Phone was not very fond of this trick. Zhang Yi put an end to this evil trend of mutual reporting. This made some people such as Ma Wenjung and Li Zhongyu have a good opinion of him. No matter what attitude you have towards Zhang Yi's previous actions, at least from this incident, it can be seen that Zhang Yi is not a person who likes to play with power and people's hearts. Chapter 833 Sun Wanqi's Confession, Add 2. The next day, it was time for dinner. Sun Wanqi put on a hat to cover her face. After what happened yesterday, she was too ashamed to see anyone. Although she had eaten that thing before, being tricked by an old man into eating it as a tonic was a different thing. After arriving at the cafeteria, Sun Wanqi went over to line up and wait for old Xia to serve her food. "I want a standard meal, 5 cents of rice." When everyone saw Sun Wanqi, they immediately laughed and said, "Xiao Su, I heard that you cried again yesterday?" Soon Wanchi's face turned pale, and veins on her face popped out. Nonsense. How could I cry? I was snoring, the sound of snoring. Another crew member shouted, "Don't talk nonsense. I saw you crying with your own eyes." This lamenting. How can it be considered crying for a lady? Suddenly, everyone in the cafeteria laughed happily. Xia Changming looked at her with a playful look on his face, but reached out and took out a standard meal from below and handed it to her. "This is your meal today." Soon Wanchi didn't look closely, hurriedly took the food away, and then went back to her room to eat. At this time, she didn't have the courage to stay here any longer, otherwise she didn't know what the crew would say. After returning to the room, she picked up a spoon and scooped a mouthful of food into her mouth. But after a few bites, she suddenly felt that the taste was not right. Soon Wanchi frowned. At first, she thought it was today's special dish, but the more she ate, the more she felt something was wrong.
Wow.
She spit out the food in one mouthful and chewed for a long time before she found that the food had gone bad. The rice was okay, but the fried vegetables were definitely problematic and the frozen chicken was not fresh. Because it was fried in hot oil, she didn't feel it at first. However, after eating a few more bites, her picky taste buds naturally found something wrong. What's wrong with today's food? Soon Wanchi picked up the food a few times, and after a closer look, she actually saw mold spots on it.
Ugh.
She lay down next to an old bucket and vomited in big mouthfuls. After a while, she ran to Xia Changming angrily to ask for an explanation. "Old Xia, how come all the food you cooked today is spoiled?" she said angrily. Xia Changming was sitting at the table with others eating, but he looked at her with a playful smile. No one was surprised by her arrival, and everyone's faces were very tacit, which made Soon Wanchi very uncomfortable. "What are you looking at?" "I ate bad food." Xia Changming pointed at her plate with chopsticks. "Have you forgotten? You said yesterday that those problematic foods won't kill people anyway. So the captain asked me to feed you this kind of food for the next week. I think Miss Sue is a man of her words, so she shouldn't have any objections." Soon Wanchi was stunned for a moment. Then she stamped her feet and cried angrily. "But this thing is not for people to eat. It's obviously pig food. It's so disgusting. I can't eat it at all." Lao Tian pointed out the mistakes in her words. "You are wrong. When we feed pigs in our hometown, we also use high-quality feed. Who would feed them spoiled food? You are bullying me, aren't you?" Soon Wanchi was so angry that her little pearls dropped one by one. The crew members did not sympathize with her at all, but laughed. "Didn't you ask for this yesterday? We can't do anything about it. You will have this kind of food standard for the next week. You said it yourself. Anyway, it won't kill you." Soon Wanchi couldn't help but cover her mouth and retched when she thought about eating this kind of food for the next week. But no one sympathized with her. Everyone was just watching the fun and treating her as a delicious side dish. Of course, without her, everyone would still live like this. Soon Wanchi saw that no one paid attention to her, so she ran to Zhu Yunk to complain with her little pearls crying. But at this time, Zhu Yunk was also very upset. Tommy was crying again, making her upset, and no matter how she coaxed him, it didn't work. This made Zhu Yunk almost collapse, and sometimes she even put her hand on his neck quietly. "I'm really crazy. Why did I accept this burden in the first place?" she thought angrily. At this time, Soon Wanchi came to find her, and of course, she was not in a good mood. "Didn't you choose this yourself? You're causing trouble for yourself. Just bear with it. It's only for a week anyway. But I'm afraid of getting an upset stomach. Didn't you say yesterday that it won't kill people?" Zhu Yunk was angry and spoke harshly. Soon Wanchi felt very aggrieved, but she didn't dare to really quarrel with Zhu Yunk. After returning to the room, she curled up in the corner and hugged her knees. She felt that the whole world was isolating her. But the hunger in her stomach was very obvious. If it is solved, she couldn't solve this problem. For the next 7 days, she had no normal food to eat. So after thinking about it and hesitating for a few hours, she decided to go to Zhang Yi to have a good talk. So she came to the door of Zhang Yi's room and knocked on Zhang Yi's door. "Who is it?" It's me, Soon Wanshi. Mr. Zhang, I have something to talk to you about. Zhang Yi opened the door and saw Soon Wanshi standing in front of the door with red eyes, tightly pursed lips, and her hands were tangled together nervously. A mischievous smile appeared at the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth. What are you doing here? Soon Wanshi sobbed twice, and the little pearl had already fallen. Hello, Mr. Zhang. I'm Soon Wanshi. I want to say sorry to you. Here. First of all, I sincerely apologize to you for my attitude yesterday. From the time the incident happened to now, I have been thinking and reflecting. When I truly, objectively, and deeply understood the truth you told me, I really blamed myself, felt ashamed, and hated myself. I don't understand why I was so ignorant and so paranoid. I accept your criticism, and at the same time I will give you a direct and clear explanation. I really know I was wrong.
As
She spoke. She covered her mouth and sobbed. So can you please not feed me expired food? Woo woo woo. Zhang Yi nodded with satisfaction. It is a great virtue to be able to correct one's mistakes. It's good that you know you are wrong. Soon Wanshi covered her face with her hands, carefully showing her eyes to observe Zhang Yi's expression. So, you are willing to forgive me, right? Do I not have to eat expired food? Zhang Yi smiled. He shook his head.
no.
Tears are worthless to me. You'd better eat more of that kind of food, and you will learn your lesson. Soon Wanshi said anxiously. I will die. Even pigs won't eat that kind of food. What if I get sick from it? Zhang Yi smiled confidently. Oh, you can rest assured about this. We have the best doctors. Soon Wanshi. Chapter 834. Chaos in the Lower Cabin. Soon Wanshi had a stomachache that night and was in excruciating pain. However, this problem was easy to solve. With Zhou Qi around, this minor illness wouldn't kill anyone anyway. At most, it would just make her suffer. Zhang Yi hated her saintly character, so he asked Zhou Qi to treat her. He treated her, but not completely. She had to suffer a little. Zhou Qi smiled and said, This is easy. If a doctor wants to make a patient suffer, she will have 100 ways. After that, she put down the ordinary painless syringe in her hand and took out a large glass syringe. Usually it was used for injections in sows. In short, in the next period of time, Soon Wanshi really tasted what it meant to be in excruciating pain. She couldn't cause any more trouble to Zhang Yi because she was struggling to live. But as the old saying goes, where there are people, there will be rivers and lakes and disputes. This kind of peace could not be maintained, and soon the people in the lower cabin made a huge commotion again. A few days later, one night, Zhang Yi strolled on the deck as usual, observing the sea surface by the way. Beware of danger. Suddenly, a noisy sound rang in his ears, as if a poor country band was playing fiercely in the cabin, accompanied by noisy shouts. What's going on? Zhang Yi frowned, and he realized that the source of the sound was the living cabin on the bottom floor. Living there were all expatriates and compatriots brought back from Yenlu Island. The living standard of this group of people on the Jinfeng was the worst, but that was only relative. Zhang Yi would not let them lack food and clothing. It was at least better than on Yenlu Island. If it weren't for Zhu Yang's pleading and Zhang Yi's consideration of the need to replenish the population in Tianhai City, he might not have brought these people back. At this time, Lao Tian and several crew members walked over from the control room with weapons in their hands, cursing.
They saw Zhang Yi when they passed by the deck.
Lao Tian hurried over to greet Zhang. Captain, those guys down there are making trouble. I'll go over and take a look. Zhang Yi glanced at the ICC at night, and it seemed that there was something secret and dangerous lurking in the deep sea. According to the habits of marine life, giant beasts generally live in the deep sea and will not easily come to the surface of the sea to move around. So it is not easy to encounter a huge sea monster. Zhang Yi had nothing to do, and he also wanted to see what those guys were doing. So he said, I'll go over with you. He and Lao Tian and others went to the bottom cabin to check the situation. The living area is divided into 3 floors. If you want to go to the bottom cabin, you have to pass through the middle cabin, which is the area where the rock flow group lives. At this time, the trouble has spread to the middle layer. Many residents of the bottom cabin took pots and pans, and anything that could make noise to the middle layer, knocking and shouting constantly. We don't have enough food. Give us food. Why can you people above us eat as much as you can, but we can't even have enough rice? Give us food. Give us food. The door to the middle floor is usually locked, and they are not allowed to enter and exit at will. The door to the middle floor from the lower floor has been broken by some residents of the lower floor. Zhang Yi asked people to point their guns at the bottom. If those guys want to riot, just shoot. Zhang Yi said mercilessly. Yes. The crew members sneered and said in unison. They all killed people without hesitation and never took such small movements seriously. A crew member walked over and opened the door of the cabin. He saw that the corridor below was densely packed with people. These were the residents of the lower cabin. The people of the Yenlu group hid in the room and did not dare to come out. Seeing Zhang Yi and Lao Tian appear, the voices of those people became much quieter for a while. The pressure from Zhang Yi and Lao Tian was still there, and they did not dare to be presumptuous. The most important thing was that Zhang Yi and Lao Tian had guns. This is more effective than 1,000 words. However, a few people at the front still plucked up the courage to step forward and said loudly to Zhang Yi, Mr. Zhang, we demand enough food. You promised us that we would have enough to eat. Now everyone is almost starving to death. You can't go back on your word. Several people behind him also shouted, Yes, why can the people above us eat all kinds of meat and fish, but we can't even have enough porridge? This is unfair. We also want to live. We want to eat. Zhang Yi slowly raised a finger in front of his mouth. He didn't yell but just said something calmly and coldly. Shut your mouths. The terrifying murderous aura in Zhang Yi's eyes made the leading guys shut their mouths timidly. Old Tian, what's going on? Didn't I say that everyone's food? Do you want a fixed time and fixed quantity supply? Lao Tian immediately shouted to one of his subordinates. Go, call Lao Xie over here. Ask him what's going on. Seeing that Zhang Yi was determined to deal with the problem, the people below stopped making a fuss and waited there quietly. Zhang Yi said to them, Don't stay here all the time. It's quite cold with the cold wind blowing in. Let's go to another place and have a good talk about this problem. Zhang Yi never gives more food, but he also doesn't deduct it. The supplies in his alien space are very sufficient, and these refugees actually complained that they were not full. There must be something fishy. Zhang Yi must find out. If someone really deducted their food, Zhang Yi would deal with it impartially. But if they are greedy and think that their food is not delicious and deliberately throw it away, or if they simply want to improve their living standards and get the same food as the middle and upper cabins, Zhang Yi will not indulge them. This is the first large-scale unrest since leaving Yenlu Island 10 days ago. Zhang Yi directly called everyone on the ship to a warehouse room on the upper deck to hold a temporary investigation meeting here. In less than 20 minutes, except for a few crew members who stayed in the control room, everyone else was there. Everyone was clearly divided, and people in different cabins occupied different positions. There were not so many chairs in the room, and most people sat on the floor or stood against the wall. Zhu Yang frowned and asked Zhang Yi, What happens? Zhang Yi glanced at her and said lightly, You'll know in a moment. He called over the guy who had led the trouble. He was a fisherman named Lu Dahai, who had gone to Yenlu Island on a fishing boat after the apocalypse. He also had two brothers, one named Rong Lei and the other named Yu Gang. The three of them were business partners on the same boat. Chapter 835 Stowaways on the Ship. Lu Dahai stood up and confidently stated the fact that there was a lack of food in the lower cabin. Our food supply has always been short of weight, and everyone is hungry every day. Mr. Zhang, we didn't have much to say at first. You were so kind to take us away, which was already a life-saving grace. So even if there is no food, we will endure it. At most, we will be hungry. Zhang Yi frowned. Everyone's food supply is fixed and no one will be missing. Unless one of you has a big appetite, you have to reflect on your own reasons. You should eat less. When you are hungry, there is only one kind of worry. But after you are full, there will be countless kinds of worries. Lu Dahai hurriedly said, We don't eat much. Adults can only eat half full, and children can eat 70% full. Although there are fishermen who do hard labor among us and have a big appetite, it can't be so much less. Xia Changming was unhappy at this time. He walked up and pointed at Lu Dehai's nose and started to scold. "Stop talking nonsense. Do you think I can deduct your food?" Lu Dehai lowered his head and stared at Xia Changming and Zhang Yi silently. Although he did not answer, his meaning was self-evident. Zhang Yi was not angry and continued to call people to ask. "In this case, why did you suddenly want to make trouble? Did someone starve to death?" At this time, the expressions of several crew members became uncomfortable. Even Zhu Yonk, who was sitting next to Zhang Yi, frowned quietly, as if there was something he couldn't say. Zhang Yi certainly understood this weird atmosphere. Something must have happened that he didn't know about. But he couldn't figure out why there was a shortage of food. Xia Changming couldn't deduct food, because it was meaningless for him to keep it. The food the crew ate was much better than that. Lao Tian. Zhang Yi winked at Lao Tian, and his eyes were full of questions. Zhang Yi's meaning was self-evident. The daily affairs on the ship were handed over to Lao Tian. Zhang Yi may not know about these things, but if Lao Tian is completely unaware, it would be his dereliction of duty. Lao Tian smiled awkwardly. "Mr. Zhang, this is actually what happened." Lao Tian told Zhang Yi and others, and only then did everyone basically understand the ins and outs of the matter. It turned out that the problem of lack of food in the lower cabin existed from the beginning. The reason was unknown, and Lao Tian and others were too lazy to care about such things. After all, the lower cabins all had big pot meals, and they only had to carry the buckets over every day and eat and drink as they pleased. There was no problem with the supplies allocated by Zhang Yi, and they were indeed supplied according to the number of people, which was theoretically enough. But later, I don't know what went wrong. If it was just like this, they wouldn't feel resentful. They were not full, but they wouldn't starve to death. However, it was still the same old problem. The crew members would naturally feel lonely after being at sea for a long time, and they would also need comfort at the spiritual and physical levels. So, they would often run down to find the women in the rock flow group or the lower cabin, and a few men. There are fewer people in the rock flow group, and there are relatively more women in the lower cabin. Their lack of food gave the crew a bargaining chip to exchange. Later, this kind of contact became more frequent, and the people in the lower cabin could often come to the middle and upper cabins and see the food they eat. People are not afraid of darkness, but when they see the light, the desire in their hearts will be aroused. Those who have never had enough food in the lower cabin gradually learned about the luxurious life of the people on the upper two floors. Listening to some people's vivid descriptions of the sailors' crew meals, every meal is a feast of fish and meat. Even the people in the middle cabin above them can often get rich protein. This made the people in the lower cabin lose control of their emotions and eventually evolved into today's riot. It was not sudden, but accumulated for a long time. Lu Dehai looked at Zhang Yi, his dark skin reflecting a somewhat dazzling light under the light. "Mr. Zhang, it's not that we don't know how to be grateful. We don't want to go against you. But we are compatriots after all. Why should we starve while these foreigners can have enough food? At worst, we can work for food." He pointed at the foreigners in the rock flow group and said. This scared by Mo and others. "Don't talk nonsense. What's wrong with foreigners? I can also work and I can also love Huashu country." Zhang Yi rubbed his hands. "I have figured out the cause and effect of the matter. The root of the problem is that there is not enough food, right?" The people in the lower cabin nodded in unison. Zhang Yi glanced at Xia Changming. "Old Xia, what's the matter?" Xia Changming hurriedly explained. "Mr. Zhang, even if you give me 100 guts, I dare not disobey your orders and withhold their food. Besides, what's the use of me having so much food?" Zhang Yi nodded. I know. His eyes swept over. When she saw Zhu Yonk, she had an obviously uncomfortable expression on her face. But Zhang Yi smiled strangely. He stood up from the sofa and walked to the middle of the warehouse. In terms of food, there is actually no shortage. But everyone still can't eat enough. What's the reason? No one understood. Zhang Yi raised a finger. The reason is very simple. It's just a basic arithmetic problem. Even elementary school students can understand it. As he said that, he walked to a little boy in the lower cabin and touched his head. Little friend, Uncle will test you. If the total amount of food remains unchanged, in what situation can people get less food on average? The little boy answered without hesitation. If there are more people. Zhang Yi smiled and touched his head. So smart. There is only one truth to the matter. That is, there are stowaways in the lower cabin, Zhang Yi said with a smile. As soon as these words came out, the whole warehouse suddenly became chaotic, and everyone was talking about it. What? There are stowaways. Impossible? How could they let people on board when the security was so strict? Old Tian hurriedly said to Zhang Yi, Mr. Zhang, we have strictly screened the people who boarded the ship. No one will take advantage of the loopholes. Zhang Yi thought of the guys he saw at that time who used hooks to sneak onto the ship. Some countries in Southeast Asia have many people who are good at climbing. Some people may even work as pirates part-time. Normally, it is unlikely to happen, but if someone cooperates with the outside, it is hard to say. Zhang Yi's eyes fell on Zhu Yonk with a playful smile in his eyes. But this look made Zhu Yonk feel like falling into an ice cave. He subconsciously looked away and felt uncomfortable. Chapter 836, Accomplishment. On the Jinfeng, Zhu Yonk's authority is theoretically second only to Zhang Yi. After all, everyone knows that she is the niece of the commander of the Jiangnan region. Zhang Yi will also take care of her face in small matters. Not to mention Lao Tian and others. At that time, there were only 2 people on the ship who could cover the stowaways and let them live in the lower cabin smoothly. Either Zhu Yonk or Zhou Ke. But Zhou Ke is not that stupid.
Everything she does is centered on Zhang Yi.
That leaves only Zhu Yonk as a possibility. After seeing Zhu Yonk's evasive eyes, Zhang Yi was completely convinced of this. Zhu Yonk felt uncomfortable all over and was ready to be scolded by Zhang Yi. The truth of the matter was just as Zhang Yi guessed. Zhu Yonk did open a back door for a group of stowaways. There were about 20 people. In order to survive, they desperately climbed onto this big ship. There were at least hundreds of people who did the same as them, and most of them were shot into the sea by Lao Tian and his men. Zhu Yonk saw the tragic scene of corpses falling into the icy sea like dumplings and couldn't bear it, so she covered them and took them into the lower cabin. The people on the boat all had similar faces, and they spoke a complicated language on weekdays, so they didn't communicate much. As long as they reduced contact with outsiders, they would not be easily exposed. Zhu Yonk's idea was to bring these people to the boat first and create a fait accompli. Even if Zhang Yi found out by then, he couldn't be so cruel as to throw more than 20 people into the sea, right? Zhu Yonk bit her lip and thought to herself, at most, you can reduce my food level and confine me. I'll just bear it. But Zhang Yi didn't pay any attention to her. Zhang Yi could guess most of Zhu Yonk's thoughts. She thinks she is great, right? Want to use her own sacrifice to exchange for the survival of the stowaways? Good, very good. Zhang Yi always likes to help others and can give her such a chance. Zhang Yi's eyes swept over the group of people in front of him. Among them were some stowaways who were evasive and extremely nervous. They were very scared. Zhang Yi only needs to ask Lao Tian to count the number of people and then check them one by one, and they can be found out. However, what is the point of doing that? It seems that it can't do anything except leave people with the impression of a devil. It will also make Zhu Yonk have a very bad impression of him, but she herself will not reflect on it at all. So, Zhang Yi had a more interesting idea in his mind. When he thought about the fun of the plan, the corners of his mouth were almost pulled to the back of his ears. Ms. Zhu and Sun Wanshi, what do you think? What should we do with these stowaways? Zhang Yi suddenly asked Zhu Yonk and Sun Wanshi behind him. Everyone looked at the 2 women in confusion. Especially those stowaways. Their eyes were fixed on them, uneasy, as if a drowning person grabbed a straw. Zhu Yonk didn't understand Zhang Yi's thoughts and thought he was humiliating herself. But she still bit her lip and insisted, they are all lives. Since they have survived, we can't abandon them. I think we should take them back to Huashu country and arrange a way for them to live. The stowaways looked at Zhu Yonk with gratitude in their eyes. Soon Wanshi looked at Zhang Yi with a strange look. But after hesitating for a while, her saintly nature broke out. Of course I choose to forgive them. They just want to live. What's wrong with them? Lao Tian and some people from the Yenlu group sneered or shook their heads helplessly. They still don't know Mr. Zhang too well. With Mr. Zhang's character, how could he tolerate the existence of these stowaways? After listening to the two, Zhang Yi nodded approvingly. Well, I forgive them. Since you are on the boat, you can stay. Everyone. Even Lao Tian and Zhu Yonk were looking at Zhang Yi with the eyes of a stranger. That feeling seemed to ask, have you been possessed by someone? Only Zhou Ke looked at Zhang Yi with a little surprise, and then tilted her head and smiled knowingly. Zhang Yi, he is definitely going to cause trouble again. The stowaways were relieved, and were full of gratitude to Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi stood in the crowd and said loudly, in the end times, human life is cheaper than grass. Who hasn't tried their best to survive? Especially at times like this, we should unite and help each other and stay together like a family. I know that many people may have some misunderstandings about me. They think I am a cold-blooded bad person. But I did that before only because of the circumstances. In fact, I am kind most of the time. Some people lowered their heads in shame, blushing because they had doubted Zhang Yi before. So, Zhang Yi waved his hand. I decided to keep them, let them live well with us, and go through the hard times together. What do you think? Driven by Zhang Yi's speech, the mood in the entire cabin became high. Good. 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 Everyone shouted happily in unison. Zhang Yi nodded with satisfaction. Well, in this case, I will not pursue anyone's responsibility for this incident. It's getting late. Everyone go back and rest. The stowaways in the lower cabin were relieved and hurriedly turned around and left the cabin. Most people had watched the excitement and were still savoring Zhang Yi's kindness. The members of the Yenlu group, who had nothing to do with it, left one after another. Lu Dahai and several others were in the inner position of the cabin, so they lined up at the back when they went out. He always felt that something was wrong. Although the atmosphere on the scene was very good, and there was a sense of great harmony. But I always felt that something seemed to have been forgotten. After thinking for a while, he suddenly woke up. It's not right. This is not right. At the beginning, they made trouble because there was not enough food. Now it's quite lively and touching, but the fundamental problem has not been solved at all. He slapped his forehead and hurried over to talk to Zhang Yi. But he was stopped by the crew because Zhang Yi was chatting with Zhu Yonk at that time. Zhu Yonk looked at Zhang Yi with surprise and emotion in his eyes. You don't blame me? With your brain, you should know that I made the decision on my own. I thought you would punish me severely. She bit her lip and said with her head down. Zhang Yi thought, you are dreaming. How can I have time to punish you every day? Maybe you have played too many tricks abroad. He smiled, gently and kindly replied, no, I don't blame you. What's your mistake? You just want everyone to live well. Chapter 837 Me? Zhu Yonk laughed very happily after hearing what Zhang Yi said. Mr. Zhang, I didn't expect you to be so reasonable. She tilted her head and looked at Zhang Yi with sparkling eyes. My opinion of you has changed a lot now. In fact, I'm starting to like you a little bit. Soon Wanshi also said beside him, although you often did some annoying things in the past, this time, I have to look up to you. You did a good job. Zhang Yi smiled and didn't answer, but changed the subject. It's getting late. Go back and rest. He turned and walked away. Seeing this, Lu Dahai hurriedly shouted over here, Mr. Zhang, Mr. Zhang. I have something to ask you. A deep light flashed in Zhang Yi's eyes. Come and tell me if you have anything to say. Lu Dahai followed Zhang Yi to the door. At this time, there were still some people from the lower cabin who had not left, including Lu Dahai's two brothers, Rong Lei and Yu Gang. They all came to their senses and found that the matter had not been resolved at all, so they stayed to ask Zhang Yi for an explanation. Mr. Zhang. Mr. Zhang. Zhang Yi walked over and asked calmly, everyone, why don't you go back? It's quite cold outside, can you bear it? The temperature of dozens of degrees below zero is indeed a bit torturous. They are not like Zhang Yi, who wears the most advanced winter clothes. But in order to have enough food, they still have to stay here. Lu Dehai said, Mr. Zhang, this matter has not been resolved yet. Those stowaways stayed. Can we increase our food supply? Otherwise, it will still not be enough. A group of people nodded repeatedly, agreeing with Lu Dehai's statement. Zhang Yi glanced at him and smiled. How much do you think the reserve food on the ship can be? We came here from Huashu country and rushed for 2 months. We didn't get any supplies on Yenlu Island, and we had to rush back immediately. You seem to be a fisherman. You should know how much supplies are left on the ship in this situation. Lu Dehai heard this, and his face changed immediately. Because according to his experience at sea, there would not be too much supplies left on the ship at this time. Zhang Yi sighed. I'm just trying to maintain the supply of materials on the ship. I didn't plan to take you with me, but who made me kind-hearted? I had to take all of you back with me. Food must also be strictly controlled. Otherwise, everyone will starve to death in the end. Do you understand? At this moment, the passengers in the lower cabin realized how difficult it was for Zhang Yi, especially the fishermen, who knew better than anyone how difficult it was to sail on the ocean. I'm sorry, Mr. Zhang. We have caused you trouble, but I see that the food for other people on the ship is not bad either. Yu Gang muttered, then raised his head and looked at Zhang Yi's expression carefully. Zhang Yi said, they are all seafarers, so of course their food must be given priority. In short, I can't do anything about this matter. The food you have below is rationed. He paused, then emphasized it again. The amount of food is given in the most reasonable way according to the number of people who boarded the ship at the beginning. Now there are more than 20 illegal immigrants, so everyone should grit their teeth and work hard to carry forward the spirit. It's better for everyone to starve together than to let them die. Lu Dehai listened to Zhang Yi's words, and a flash of inspiration suddenly flashed in his mind. Zhang Yi smiled and patted him on the shoulder. Lu Dehai, right? You are a very good person. I believe you can understand my approach. The food is limited, but with more people, no one can handle it. At this point, Zhang Yi sighed. If I had known this earlier, I would have controlled the number of people on the ship. With fewer people, won't there be enough food? After saying that, Zhang Yi turned and left, disappearing into the night. Lu Dehai was left there, bowing his head and thinking for a long time. Rong Lei and Yu Gang came over and asked, Brother Lu, what does Mr. Zhang mean? Did he help us solve the problem of food? Lu Dehai raised his head and glanced at his 2 brothers. Then he said slowly, if it is solved. Rong Lei and Yu Gang, huh? Is it solved or not? Lu Dehai sighed. Try it carefully. A sinister expression flashed in his eyes.
Subconsciously,
he looked at the vast dark ice sea. This ship seemed to be an isolated island, and they were all survivors on the island. However, because of the problem of food, the conflict would break out sooner or later. He vaguely realized that Zhang Yi was telling him what to do, but he was not sure. If this step was wrong, he would put himself in danger. Let's go back first. It's so cold outside. Rong Lei hugged his arms and shivered. Lu Dehai nodded, hugged the 2 brothers, and walked down to the cabin. On the other side, Zhang Yi just went back and was blocked by Zhu Yonk. Mr. Zhang, are you in a hurry? Zhu Yonk crossed her arms and looked at Zhang Yi leisurely, with a bit of strangeness in her eyes. What's wrong? Is there any problem that has not been solved? Zhang Yi blinked and asked with a smile. Zhu Yonk put down her arms. Come with me. I think we need to have a good talk about how to deal with the problem of this group of passengers who boarded the ship later. She called the group of stowaways the passengers who boarded the ship later. It was my fault for not saying hello to you before. But now you have accepted them. You have to find a way to settle them. So, I hope you can solve their food problem. After all, it's not appropriate to let the passengers in the lower cabins go hungry all the time. Zhang Yi was surprised and pointed at his nose in astonishment.
Me?
No way, no way. Miss Zhu, please don't joke with me like this. Zhang Yi waved his hands repeatedly. Don't tell me that you brought people on board, but don't know how to solve their food problem? Zhang Yi shook his head decisively. That's impossible. Miss Zhu, you are such a smart woman. It's impossible for you to make such a low-level mistake. You must be kidding me. That's not interesting. Zhu Yonk was stunned. Her expression was a little flustered. In fact, when she was kind enough to help those stowaways get on board, she really didn't consider how those people would eat and drink.
She
just stuffed them into the cabin and let them live with the people who were in the lower cabin before. As the eldest lady of the Zhu family, when has she ever worried about the problem of firewood, rice, oil, and salt? Chapter 838. This matter has nothing to do with me. Zhang Yi pointed at Zhu Yonk. You, please don't joke with me like this. I believe you have already planned it, right? Zhu Yonk coughed twice. Ahem, of course. She looked up at Zhang Yi and smiled. Don't I have you? You are the captain of the investigation team. I know your ability. Space system, you can carry a lot of things with you. I believe you should be able to solve the food problem of only more than 20 people. Zhang Yi sneered in his heart. So you go to be a good person and let me do all the troublesome things. Fortunately, you are not my leader, otherwise I will be mad at you. On the surface, Zhang Yi showed a helpless expression. No, Miss Zhu, it's really boring if you play like this. My space is only the size of a small warehouse, and there are all kinds of things in it. Weapons, ammunition, and fuel and other supplies needed by the Jinfeng alone occupy more than half of the space. As for food, I did bring a lot. But you also know that our voyage will take at least 4 months to go back and forth. There is no supply along the way, and now there are more than 100 people on the ship. Don't you think about why I calculate everyone's food carefully and even provide it according to everyone's identity? It's because there is not much stock. Is it much? Not much. Zhang Yi shook his head. So, I really can't help you this time. It's not that I don't want to, but I have the will, but not the strength. Zhu Yonk widened her eyes. Are you really fake? She began to get a little anxious, because the best way she could think of was to rely on Zhang Yi. Otherwise, where would she find food for those 20 people on this vast ice sea? There are still nearly 2 months before she goes back. Even if each person has 1 kilogram of food per day, it will be 6 or 7,000 kilograms. Zhang Yi said calmly, I am not a person without kindness. If there is a way, I would have wanted to save all the people on Yanlu Island. But how much supplies do we consume every day? Do you really have no idea? Zhu Young's face was full of embarrassment. She ran so far for the first time on a mission, so she didn't have any experience. Then, what should we do? We can't let them starve every day, right? Zhang Yi took 2 steps back and waved his hand. You shouldn't say, what should we do? But, what should I do? You brought the people here, and the next problem will be left to you to solve. I will not participate in order to avoid suspicions. Zhang Yi raised his hands high, indicating that he would not intervene, and then smiled and walked away slowly. As soon as he turned around, the smile on Zhang Yi's face turned into a sneer. In fact, he still had a lot of supplies in the different space. After all, it was enough to supply the entire shelter for 200 years. But why should he use his own things to do favors for Zhu Yonk, a silly woman? Let her solve the trouble caused by his overflowing saintly heart. Zhu Zheng also said that this time he wanted Zhu Yonk to come here for training. As long as Zhang Yi did not take action, there would be chaos in the lower cabin sooner or later. At that time, there must be a very interesting ending. Zhang Yi smiled even brighter when he thought of that scene. He hummed a song and walked slowly to his room. The opposite of darkness is light, and behind light is shadow. Who has the right to define justice and evil? Zhang Yi became a hands-off shopkeeper, too lazy to get involved in Zhu Young's mess. This immediately made her feel troubled. For the first time in her life, the eldest lady of the Zhu family began to worry about food. However, in the vast ocean, where else could she get food except relying on Zhang Yi? But Zhang Yi clearly refused. At the beginning, she was the first to let people on board without Zhang Yi's permission, so she was not right. Zhu Yonk frowned and had to go back to her room to slowly think of a solution. After returning, she told her temporary best friend Sun Wenqi about this matter. After hearing this, Sun Wenqi said angrily, that Zhang Guy is too much. Isn't this embarrassing for you? You are the eldest daughter of the Tangdingzhu family. How can you care about their eating, drinking, defecation, and urination? I think he doesn't know his position at all. You are just too good to him. Otherwise relying on your uncle's relationship. Zhu Yonk interrupted her. Okay, I am not a person who likes to bully others. She was embarrassed to tell Sun Wenqi that she couldn't control Zhang Yi at all. After all, she was born in an official family, so she still had to save face. But now without his nod, where can I get so much food for more than 20 people in the lower cabin? Sun Wenqi counted on her fingers. More than that. In addition to food, other daily necessities will be in short supply. Sanitary napkins, brown sugar, medicine, toilet paper, fresh water. There are not enough. Zhu Yonk felt a headache the more he thought about it, and sighed suddenly. Soon Wenqi had an idea, and thought of a good way. Yes, I have a good idea. Zhu Yonk looked at her immediately. What do you think? Soon Wenqi smiled. I have a way to solve the food problem first. Under Zhu Yonk's inquiry, she did not keep it a secret, and said her idea. It's not easy to talk to Zhang, but the other people on the ship have to give you face, right? Humph. I see that those crew members have fish and meat all day long, and they have to dump the unfinished food into the sea. It's such a waste. Why not call on them to save some food, and each person only needs to take out 1/3 of the food and donate it to the people in the lower cabin, which will definitely satisfy their food and clothing. Zhu Yonk rolled his eyes and couldn't help thinking secretly, this is indeed a good idea. Zhang Yi has always been very generous to the people around him. The crew's drinking standards are very high. Not only is the food rich, but everyone is also supplied with a day and a half of the amount of ordinary people every day. This also led to their living standards being extremely luxurious compared to the people in the middle and lower cabins, and there would be a lot of leftovers that needed to be thrown away every day. Zhu Yonk's eyes showed a smug light. She had made up her mind and would go to Lao Tian tomorrow to make this request. It seemed that with her status, those people would have to give her some face if she just went there to ask for some food. Although the amount was not much, it could maintain the basic survival of more than 20 people in the lower cabin. This could be regarded as solving the most important contradiction at the moment. Zhang Yi, I'll let you see if I can solve the problem on the ship. Zhu Yonk snorted, and a stone was temporarily put down in her heart. Suddenly, the sound of a baby crying loudly rang in her ears again. Soon Wenqi said hurriedly, Oh, he peed again. The two women hurriedly changed his diaper, but did not notice that the child's buttocks had already been fermented red. Chapter 839, A Clever Plan. The next morning, Zhu Yonk found Lao Tian during lunchtime. First mate Tian, can you come over and chat for a while? I have something I want to discuss with you. Zhu Yonk called Lao Tian over with a smile. Lao Tian held a chicken leg in his hand, his face full of doubts. Zhu Yonk usually had a coldness in her bones. Even when she smiled at them, she was instinctively distant. But today, she seemed to be deliberately close. If you are too attentive without any reason, you are either a traitor or a thief. Lao Tian muttered in his heart, but still walked over with a smile. Miss Zhu, is there anything wrong? Is the food in the morning not to your taste? Lao Tian followed Zhu Yonk to the corner of the cafeteria and asked with a smile. He still had to be careful to please the eldest lady of the Zhu family. Zhu Yonk shook her head. It's not that problem. Although the food tastes average, it can be swallowed. I came to you to ask you to do me a favor. What do you think? You won't refuse this face? Facing Zhu Yonk's inquiring eyes, Lao Tian laughed.
Look at what you said.
If you want us to do something, can't you just tell the ship? Wouldn't it be beneath your dignity to ask our subordinates? Zhu Yonk coughed softly. This matter is not a big deal. There is no need to go through Mr. Zhang. Lao Tian frowned slightly. Then tell me what you want to hear. Zhu Yonk said, I want to ask you to help do a good deed. She made her purpose clear. That is to ask the dozen crew members on the ship to save part of their food every day and provide it to the stowaways in the lower cabin. Your daily food is very rich and you can't finish it. Last time I saw you throwing the unfinished rice into the sea. Look, it's a waste to throw it away anyway, so why not take it out and do a good deed? I will also appreciate your kindness. Zhu Yonk looked at Lao Tian with a smile. She felt that Lao Tian would definitely agree to her request. After all, this matter is not difficult to do, and it can also please the niece of the regional commander. Why not do it? But who knows? Things will not develop as she imagined. After listening silently, Lao Tian did not give a reply, but asked, "Have you discussed this matter with our captain?" Zhu Yong's face changed slightly. If Zhang Yi knew about it, wouldn't she be ridiculed by Zhang Yi? So she decided to act first and report later, and go directly to Lao Tian to settle the matter. "There is no need to disturb Mr. Zhang for this kind of thing," Zhu Yong said uncomfortably. When Lao Tian heard her say this, his eyes became playful and his back straightened. "In this case, I'm in a bit of trouble." He sighed and looked embarrassed. Zhu Yong widened her eyes. "How can this be difficult? Just share the food you can't finish. At most, you can pick out the things you don't like to eat. What's so difficult about that?" Lao Tian explained. "The drinking standard for each crew member is specially set by our captain. Ocean voyage itself is a test of will. The captain has considered us very carefully and satisfied us to the greatest extent in terms of diet. Only when the crew are full can they work with full energy. Haha, as for the issue of throwing away the food that is not finished, such things are unpredictable. You can't guarantee that someone will have a poor appetite one day and eat less. If you encounter heavy work, your appetite will open up and you will eat more. If I do as you say, it will be difficult to coordinate the amount of food. If everyone doesn't eat well, they will not have the energy to work. It is easy to get into trouble in this vast ocean." Zhu Yong was about to argue. Old Tian did not give her any chance and said first, "So the standard meal size is determined by the captain after careful consideration. How about this? You discuss it with the captain. If he gives an order, I dare to change it. Otherwise, I can't make the decision on such matters." Zhu Yong never thought that she couldn't even command Old Tian. But Old Tian's words were so convincing that she didn't know how to refute. "Then is there really no good ways?" Zhu Yong's tone was a little pleading. Hearing this, Old Tian didn't dare to really offend Zhu Yong. He was not Zhang Yi, and he didn't have such courage. Old Tian stroked his beard and thought carefully before he came up with a solution. "How about this? Every day after we finish our meal, no matter how much leftover food there is, we can collect it and send it to them. This way, a few people can have a bite." Zhu Yong rejected this proposal without hesitation. "That's absolutely not possible. They are all human beings, not animals. How can you let them eat your saliva?" Old Tian said with a smile, "Miss Zhu, at this time, human life is cheaper than grass. When I was suffering in Tianhai City, let alone swill, I even ate rotten water." Zhu Yong kept shaking her head. The head could not accept this practice. "This is impossible. There are more than 100 people in the lower cabin. If some of them are fed normal food and some are fed swill, there will definitely be trouble." Lao Tian sneered and looked down on those stowaways. "Maybe they will rush to eat our swill. What's wrong with swill? The food standard of their crew is top-notch. There are fat and chicken bones in the leftovers, which is better than the food in the lower cabin. Didn't you see that in the last century, the people of Silla liked to pick up the garbage thrown by Colombian soldiers and cook it? It was also called troop pot. Refugees can no longer be treated by the standards of ordinary people. It is a great blessing to give them a bite to eat and keep them alive." Zhu Yong kept shaking his head. No matter how Lao Tian persuaded him, he would not agree to do so. Lao Tian was helpless. "Then I have no other choice. You can do it yourself." Zhu Yong gritted her teeth. "Wait a minute, if this method doesn't work, I have another way." She thought about it all night yesterday and came up with a clever plan. Lao Tian listened attentively. Zhu Yong pointed to the vast ocean and said, "We are on the sea. In fact, there are many fish in the sea. These are all very good ingredients. I want to mobilize everyone to go fishing to replenish our food warehouse. In this way, maybe it will not only solve the problem of food shortage but also expand storage." Zhu Yong is very proud of her intelligence. Because he had been sailing for so long, Zhang Yi had never thought of replenishing food through sea fishing. However, Lao Tian rejected her proposal without hesitation. "Ms. Zhu, this idea is very good, but it is completely impossible to realize. Zhu Yonk was unhappy. Why not? Lao Tian, I also go to sea frequently and have gone sea fishing on a cruise ship. There are many big fish in the sea, and one fish can feed several people. Why not? Answer me. Chapter 840. Hitting a snag, Ad 1. Old Tian pierced her beautiful fantasy without any hesitation. You spent a lot of money to go out for fun. Can it be the same as now? Sea fishing is to choose the sea area with rich aquatic products and use the best bait to fish. But now, look at where we are. There are not fish everywhere in the sea. If you don't choose a special place, it's normal for you to fish for a day and not see anything. Besides, fishing also requires bait. Do you want us to take out food for you to use? Old Tian pointed outside. The Jean foam was moving rapidly. The ship is so fast and the wind and waves are so strong. No one can stay outside all the time. If you don't believe it, you can take a fishing rod and try it. If you can stand firmly on the deck, you are amazing. Zhu Young's face turned green and red after what old Tian said. The clever plan she thought hard about was a complete joke in the eyes of the old sailor. This doesn't work and that doesn't work. What should I do to solve the problem of food? Zhu Young said angrily. Old Tian put his hand in front of his mouth and coughed hard a few times. If it wasn't like this, he would definitely have laughed on the spot. Difficult to deal with? Then don't do it. Who asked you to cause trouble and meddle in other people's business? Who can you blame now? Do you really think that food falls from the sky? I still say that if you really want to solve this problem, you can only go to the captain to discuss it. Lao Tian and Zhu Yonk said goodbye and went back to eat. He came to the dining table where the sailors were, picked up a large bowl of rice, and there were large pots of chicken, duck, fish, and meat on the table. Although they were all frozen foods, they were still very delicious after being cooked by Xie Changming. The more Yonk looked at it, the angrier she became. She didn't even want to eat it this time. At this time, Sun Wanshi also came over. She held an iron basin of food in her hand and said to Zhu Yonk, "Senior sister, how's the discussion going? Did the people on the ship agree to share the food with the people in the lower cabin?" Zhu Yonk shook her head. "No." Soon Wanshi glanced at them angrily, and the crew over there laughed, eating and drinking, chatting, and they were very leisurely and happy. You really have no sympathy at all. Senior, let's go and give our food to those poor people who can't eat. Her food was specially made and hard to swallow, so she didn't feel bad about giving it away. At most, she could just eat and drink with Zhu Yonk at noon. Zhu Yonk was also angry at this time and had no appetite at all. She felt that Lao Tian and others were too cold-blooded, just like Zhang Yi. But she was different. She was a high-quality talent who had received higher education in the West and knew how to respect others. The more she was in such an environment, the more she had to show her glory and greatness. Only in this way could she highlight her superiority and set off the insignificance of Zhang Yi and others. Thinking of this, she felt that the food in her hands became sacred. It was like the sacrament in the worship ceremony. Wait a minute, I'll go find Zhou Kuer. Zhu Yonk felt that the food for two people was too little, and Zhou Kuer gave her the feeling that she was someone she could communicate with. So she wanted Zhou Kuer to join their good deeds. Soon, the two of them stepped on the firm steps and came to the outside of Zhang Yi and Zhou Kuer's room. Knock, knock, knock. Zhou Kuer. Knock, knock, knock. Zhou Kuer. Knock, knock, knock. Zhou Kuer. After knocking 3 times in a row, the door finally opened. Zhou Kuer was wearing a black nightgown, and half of her body was exposed from the crack of the door. Her soft hair fell down her shoulders and fell on her towering chest, which was indescribably charming. It's early in the morning. Why don't you eat well and come to see me? Zhu Yong glanced at the room through the crack of the door and didn't see Zhang Yi, but she knew Zhang Yi was inside. Zhu Yong deliberately said loudly, "Lisa and I are going to help those poor refugees and share our food with them. Do you want to come with us?" "Ah." Zhou Kuer had a face full of laughter, looking at the rice bowls in their hands, feeling a little speechless. "Are you really going over there?" "Yes, do you want to come with me?" I believe you are a caring person, Zhu Yonk said deliberately. She came to Zhou Ke for another idea. The food Zhou Ke and Zhang Yi ate was different from the others because Zhang Yi brought it himself. So when Zhou Ke gave out food, it was equivalent to Zhang Yi giving it out. This could open a loophole and allow Zhang Yi to lower his guard against the stowaways. Zhou Ke smiled and said, I just finished eating.
Ah,
Is that so? Zhu Yonk and Sun Wanshi both looked regretful. Zhou Ke pointed to the stainless steel rice bowls in their hands. But I'm curious, how many people can share this little food? Sun Wanshi snorted. No matter how little it is, it's still a token of our love. It shows our kindness and humanity. Zhou Ke nodded with a smile on her face. It's a good idea. I'm just a little worried that when they have more people and only so much food, they will easily fight. After saying this, Zhu Yonk and Sun Wanshi looked at each other. Yes. Why didn't they consider this problem?
but
Soon, Zhu Yonk found an excuse for herself. Zhang Yi was in the room, and she would not give Zhang Yi the opportunity to laugh at her. No, the people on Yanlu Island are of high quality and will not rob. Zhou Ke nodded. Well, I wish you a complete success. Zhu Yonk and Sun Wanshi turned and left, walking towards the lower cabin. Zhou Ke closed the door and walked to Zhang Yi and sat down. At this time, Zhang Yi was sitting on a sofa, chatting with people in the shelter using a satellite phone. However, Zhu Yonk's voice was too loud, and it was hard not to hear. Two silly women, they're going to do silly things again. Zhou Ke smiled slightly, charming and attractive. There is no way, they are all women who have never experienced the hardships of life. So it is inevitable that they will be naive. Zhang Yi said lightly, whether they are naive or not has nothing to do with me. It's just that I don't like two self-proclaimed flies buzzing in my ears all the time. He raised his head and showed a playful smile to Zhou Ke. Then take this opportunity to teach them a good lesson. Here, Zhu Yonk and Sun Wanshi have come downstairs. They found the crew to help them open the door and go to deliver food to the poor refugees in the lower cabin. Seeing this, the crew kindly reminded, two ladies, you'd better be careful. The situation downstairs is not good now. Zhu Yonk said, it's okay. We are here to deliver food to them. They will only be grateful to us. Dear viewers, we think these two high-profile girls are really crazy, but you will know during the story they meet their end crazily. Thanks for staying tuned. Please comment and subscribe to the channel if not already. We will be posting more videos soon. Really appreciate your support to grow this channel.